I just think it's important, again, that we just, especially as elected officials who represent the entire community, that we acknowledge that there are different voices, different perspectives, and we be respectful of those. And again, I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but there are differences, and we should be respectful of that. I wanted to ask the commissioner, and you did touch on this a little bit, but if you could be sort of more specific, when we talk about potential reductions in funds, what are some of the areas where that discretionary money could come from? Because again, it's harder with collective bargaining to pull it out of salary and wages, but what are some of the programs that potentially would be impacted?
So through the chair, Counselor, if I understand your question, and let me just be clear, our discretionary funds are so limited. I think that any discretionary funds go to increased costs in fuel and things of that nature. Like the reduction in our budget is personnel, is salaries. That's the 95% thing. That's the thing to go at that is easy touch. So it would be salaries. And we talk about our diversity increasing. Last year we had to sit out the cadet program because that negotiated hiring freeze. This year we look to bring it back. I mean, remember, the purpose of that is to increase diversity and to ensure that we can Cambridge kids in these public safety jobs that are actually very well paying. We've already seen benefits with our first initial class. We have one African-American male successfully graduate the academy. We have a Hispanic, Latinx male who's scheduled to graduate in a month. So, we have these successes, and we're able to put diverse candidates, in these public safety jobs because of these programs. But then these programs would obviously be in line to be cut, and would not be in line to be cut. They would be among the first to be cut if we reduce our budget. There's no way to get around the personnel impacts that reducing our budget had. We can look at what any new programs that we implement and how they impact us, and then thoughtfully look at whether there's an opportunity to retreat. But once again, it has to be measured. It has to be a thoughtful process.
And Mr. Chair, through you, just a quick follow-up. And with those personnel cuts, I mean, I don't know the answer to this. I mean, we know that there are some members of the police department who are in unions, and there are certain rights that are collectively bargained with those unions that make reductions sort of more difficult. And I assume that there are probably personnel in the police department who are not members of unions. I don't know that for sure. And so would we be talking about those would be the first cuts that would happen because those are sort of the easier ones to do? And those positions more in line with kind of the more social service work that gets done? I'm just trying to figure out where it would, where exactly it would come from if it happened.
So it's a both and through the chair, Counselor. It's from it's going to affect every corner of the department budget decreases because it's going to result in a reduction of personnel from. Remember, like the social justice, restorative, and procedural justice we do is so interwoven throughout the fabric of the entire police department that if you touch it everywhere. So those reductions will come. It really impacts morale, as I already indicated, as you just said, and I thought I indicated earlier. We got a collective bargaining agreement in place that flat out mandates that we do reverse or inverse seniority if we're talking about layoffs. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, we do inverse seniority in terms of layoff. In terms of morale, when I tell you that literally we had two prime candidates, we had a number one candidate and a number two candidate in both civilian and potential employees back out because of the uncertainty of what might happen with our budget because of the histrionics from last year. That impacts morale for our professional staff because they also believe that if cuts were to happen, that they would likely be first to go. And then it impacts the overall morale because, we're this symbiotic organ. So as I said, these discussions don't just dissipate, even if they don't happen. They really manifest themselves in real world consequences that you can point to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Zondervan has his hand up. Counselor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been a fascinating discussion. I, I don't quite understand the claim that these discussions themselves have such a negative impact, because again, part of the challenge here that we're trying to navigate is, do these positions even need to be in the police department? And when the commissioner says, for example, that we need to do patrols in Central Square to reduce social harm and provide access to services, are we saying that those services can only be provided by armed police officers, that there's no way that we could provide an alternative service that did not involve armed police officers that would accomplish the same goal?
Through the chair, if that was a question to me, Counselor, what I said was that you have to look that they also perform, or they also engage in harm reduction strategies. That's what I said. So they patrol, but then they also spend their time, helping out vulnerable populations.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that we could be providing those services without using armed police officers, and that is frankly what I'm suggesting here. Nobody's suggesting that these services go away. We're simply asking, do they need to be provided by armed police officers? I also find it interesting.
That's a conflation, though, Counselor. That's a conflation. Nobody said that they solely had to be provided by the police officers are there for a public safety component, and it's something that they do ancillarily. Because we adopt a protective stance here in Cambridge.
Okay, this is not budgetary right now. This is policy.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
I firmly believe with all my heart, this is what the council will be discussing in June, policy about the future. As I've said before, I believe there is truth in what is being said from the other side of what we're doing now from the other side. And I believe the administration will, and I'm including the commissioner at the top of that list, will look at this seriously. But this is not the proper time. We've already did this in the first hour, and we got a lot to get through. We're about halfway through, not even.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would appreciate the opportunity to finish asking my question.
No, not.
You can ask a question, but it has to relate to the budget. That's what we're doing today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe all my questions have and will continue to relate to the budget. That's why we're here. I also heard in previous statements, as well as last year when we had this conversation, that every time we ask for a reduction in the police budget, we are told that the only way to accomplish that is by reducing the diversity of the police budget. At the same time, we're told that we are operating with a lot of vacancies, and I can see that in the budget backup. So I don't quite understand that. If the police commissioner could help me understand, if we have all these vacancies and then we're trying to fill some of those with cadets, why would we necessarily reduce diversity just because we're reducing the size of the force?
Through the chairs that we knew we would have then, but we had additional vacancies. So it's not an ideal state that we're in. So we're forcing officers. If you heard me also, I had that our backfill overtime has ballooned 40% from last fiscal year, the prior fiscal year, just because of filling those overtimes because of the high vacancies. It's not desirable. Yeah, we're trying to make sure that we onboard diverse individuals and Cambridge kids. Cadet program is helpful in that, but it's not the only way or the only measure we use to fill vacancies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I think that's perhaps some of the, I don't even want to say disagreement, but different visions here, because again, what I'm hearing from members of the community that I'm in extensive communication with is that we would like to see a lot of these functions provided not by the police, not by armed police officers, but by other trained community members who can perform the same function, but are not associated with law enforcement specifically. My final question, and this has been mentioned several times last week, Monday during the council discussion, and even today, that the task force is somehow going to make recommendations that would lead to a reduction in police budget, but nothing I've heard today indicates to me that that's in fact going to happen, or even that's what the commissioner or the manager would like to see. So,
Okay, we're going to discuss that in June. That is not on the budget at the moment. I agree it's important, and we're going to deal with it in the future, not today. And we've talked about this a number of times already. I agree it's important, and we're going to deal with it in the future, not today. And we've talked about this a number of times already. And my job is to move this meeting forward, and that's what I'm going to do. And I might add, there are other people who've submitted questions who've not had an opportunity to talk yet. So I'm going to take my lead responsibility and move on. In fact, there are one other counselor who wishes to speak on this, and they've been waiting a good time.
So, Mr. Chair, this was my final question, and I would like an answer, which is, should we expect to see a reduction in the police budget in June or not?
I don't think we can answer that until we see the whole report, the whole committee report. You can bring that up at some other meeting that's about policy, and when we deal with the extended budget or refined budget on this issue. But we don't know. I'm not in that committee. You're not in that committee. We don't know where it's going. But now I have to deal with this budget. And I've said before, I concur with the principles, and I do want change. But now we have to deal with what is before us, or we'll never get done with this budget. Councilor Toomey, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership and patience in this first day of budget deliberations. I will be brief. I just want to say to the police commissioner and to the entire department staff that how much my constituents appreciate all that you do on a daily basis to protect and serve us. And that's a big thing. It's not only protect, but it is serving us. And I will say this, I'm listening to what the commissioner just said. I'm somewhat alarmed, but his reference to unacceptably high levels of vacancies. As you know, Mr. Chair and Mr. Commissioner, in the last month or two, we've had an awful increase in the number of shootings of people in this city. And it's very alarming to me. And I know there's been some other guns found throughout the city. And unfortunately, throughout the country, there's been the gun sales are charts. From all age groups and all ethnic groups and everything. So, Commissioner, I guess my concern is, I'm sure you're hopefully ahead of what potentially is coming in the next couple of months in terms of gun violence, and that we are prepared, hopefully prepared to deal with that, and that all our residents are safe. But these shootings have happened in all parts of the city, and it's unacceptable. And so I just want to say to deal with that, and that all our residents are safe. But these shootings have happened in all parts of the city, and it's unacceptable. And so I just want to say that. And when there is a shooting, I think the resident would expect an officer to appear on the scene with the appropriate equipment to deal with that situation that they encounter. Thank you.
Commissioner Bard, did you want to?
Sure.
Please.
I was going to ask if the council wanted me to respond to his statement, but yeah, we're doing our diligence to address the violence, working with our regional partners. As you know, our most recent victims were from out of town, and we're working to make sure that violence doesn't rear its head into Cambridge. But once again, we're not, immune. We don't have this bubble wrapped around us. So what goes on in the region impacts us here in Cambridge. So we are at unacceptably high levels of vacancies, and it's forcing me to utilize overtime to force officers to fill those vacancies so that we can meet minimum staffing requirements.
Thank you. I'll let Councilor McGovern have the next question. I believe the mayor and Councilor Nolan will add questions after him. Councilor McGovern?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Commissioner, we did have we had a couple conversations last year around the potential of body cameras for police, and I know it's something you have been working on behind the scenes. I'll just say that we know, as we sadly have seen, that body cameras don't stop incidents of violence from happening, and that's not really the intent, but they do provide, if we haven't had all the body camera footage from incidents around the country, there'd probably be, these things wouldn't be as well, and there wouldn't be as much evidence to support the victims of these violent crimes at the hands of law enforcement. There's also been times cameras have been used to, where there's been debate around what actually happened at an event. So keeping it in perspective, it's not an answer to every problem, but they have been shown to be useful in certain circumstances. So where do we stand with that? It's not in the budget. I know you've been working on it. What's the update?
Through the chair, Councilor, thanks for the question. So we're at the stage where we're working with the purchasing agent, working with Ms. Unger to get an RFP out there, request for proposal for body cameras. Obviously, I'm a proponent of body cameras. I think they, are the best neutral and detached witnesses, and they keep individuals, generally on their best behavior. It's obviously a process that would have to go through, surveillance ordinance process, but that's where we are right now, working on that request for proposal. I don't think that from, inception to ordinance process, but that's where we are right now, working on that request for proposal. I don't think that from, inception to implementation is a long process. You got companies chomping at the bit, trying to service Cambridge in that area. So RFP should be going out shortly. Not exactly sure when, but the council will have to be intimately engaged in that process because of the surveillance ordinance.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. And so does that, I would assume that there would have to be some negotiation or some agreement reached with the union around this. Is that true? And have those conversations taken place, or we're going to do the RFP first?
We're doing the RFP, and we've had preliminary conversations with the unions, but obviously they view it as a substantial change to working conditions. But contrary to what popular beliefs may be, they're willing to work with the city manager and with the city and make sure that they believe that having body cameras is in their best interest as well. Let me say that.
I would follow up that I am in 100% agreement with the commissioner that we will get this done with the support of the unions. There's no question in that.
Thank you. And I would assume, again, maybe it's a silly question, but I would assume, as with other issues or other allocations, just because it's not in the budget doesn't mean we won't potentially move forward with it in the upcoming fiscal year. That will just come through a separate allocation.
Through the chair, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. I look forward to that happening. Councilor Nolan, you have a question that you haven't brought up already?
No, I had talked earlier. I don't think it was up.
Okay. No, it wasn't up, but you have on your list of questions.
I think they were, I mostly rolled them into.
Great. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I do have some information on others. I might contact the commissioner later. We can talk later.
I had a question, but Councilor Sabrina Wheeler's question pretty much covered it, but I realize there's another question, and that is, Commissioner, in an average year, how many police officers retire? It must be 3 to 6 or something like that.
Through you and to you, Mr. Chair. So this is what we are in are well out of average years full time. So in a normal year, I look to have about anywhere from 10 to 15 officers a trip through retirement. We knew that 1988, 1989, 1990 were large classes in the, for the Cambridge Police Department. I say that and I go back those years because that starts 32 years ago, and that's when officers are max out in retirement benefits. So we knew that we saw this large portion of our department eligible to leave and indicating that they would be leaving. So we, as I said earlier, we succession plan. So we try to get, enough officers in the academy in advance, because think of it in terms of when an officer goes into the academy, then we got the 5.5 months of training, then another 12 to 16 weeks of training here on the street before they even, before we can even put them by themselves. So that's how far off we are from replacing or that individual officer becoming a really viable officer on that. So we succession plan, and the hiring freeze that was negotiated last year was, irrespective of our actual needs. So, it was one of the negative consequences of that.
Well, thank you for coming. Unless I see another hand go up, I'm going to move
the budget.
Move the budget, and I don't see one. So formally, I'll say, move to forward the department's budget section to the full council with a favorable recommendation.
I'm just going to state it again. The motion is to move the police department's budget to the full city council with a favorable recommendation. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan. Councilor Nolan.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
No.
No. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
No,
No. Mayor Siddiqui. Mayor Siddiqui. Absent. Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. The motion passes. 6 in favor, 2 against, and 1 absent.
Thank you. The next area of discussion is trafficking and transportation. And the first question submitted to us is from the Vice Mayor. Vice Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My internet is a little bit unstable right now. I'm hoping that I can get through these questions to Mr. Barr and to the city manager. I just had a quick question on some open positions. So there are 2 open positions under engineering project manager - bike lanes. I'm just curious what these new positions are for, if they are to help comply with the cycling safety ordinance, if traffic, parking, and transportation can describe the roles and responsibilities of these 2 new hires, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Thank you, Vice Mayor Mallon, and through you, Councilor Carlone. Before I answer, I'll just mention that I'm joined today by a few of my staff, Stephanie McAuliffe, who's our Assistant Director for Parking Management, Brooke McKenna, who's the Assistant Director of Management, Patrick Baxter, our Engineering Manager, and Gardy Laurent, who's our Financial Manager, as well as handling administration and technology. So just wanted to introduce them. The simple answer to your question is yes, but I'll turn it over to Brooke to provide a little bit more details on the actual duties and responsibilities.
Thank you. Through you, Councilor Chair, I'm not sure that's right. So these 2 positions will be working on the separated bike lane project to meet the requirements of the ordinance. We'll be working at a much faster pace, a very accelerated pace than we have in the past. So having these 2 dedicated project managers will really help us keep multiple projects moving forward at the same time. They'll perform a range of duties, including managing the public outreach, overseeing the consultants who help us with design, doing design work themselves, and helping with the collaboration of all of the departments who work on these projects, including TPT, CDD, DPW, the city manager's office. So they'll really be in charge of making sure that we're moving forward at the pace that we need to meet the requirements of the ordinance. And we're actually in the midst of the hiring process right now on these. And they should be on board in the next few months.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. McKenna anticipated my next question, which was when we would likely see these two positions come on board. I know that a lot of this work is coming up quickly, so I'm glad to see these two positions in the budget to support this initiative. I know it's an intense one. And Mr. Barr, thank you for introducing your team. I think one of the things that's been missing this year and last year too is gathering in the Sullivan Chamber and really getting to say hello to all the staff members and really seeing everybody face to face. So thanks to your whole for being here today and for your work over the last 15 months of the pandemic. I know I've said it before today, but it has not been an easy year for anybody. And I know you brought your best selves to the city and to this work. So thank you for being here. And thank you for answering that quick question. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, your question is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, there's a lot of things in this department that I could pull and talk about, and in general think Transportation Department's doing a lot of great work on things like transit signal priority, bike lanes, bus lanes. I just wanted to ask about one thing, and